If you're feeling defeated watching everyone else move forward while you're sitting in the same place, maybe embarrassed about where you are, then this video is for you. Because 10 years ago, that was me. I was this hopeless college dropout, buried in debt, with zero ambition to do anything with my life. I was on this fast track to becoming a complete disappointment to everyone who believed in me. But once I finally took action and tried to turn it all around, a few years later, I was living on my own, saving money for the first time in my life, and training other people how to fix helicopters. I'm not special, but I figured out some hard truths and set certain principles in place to help me get going. And if I could turn it around, so can you. You just have to be willing to get started. So today I'm going to share the key fundamentals that pulled me out of that hole, and I hope it'll inspire you to do the same. The first fundamental is a really big one, and it has nothing to do with money or courses. Even though I was around 22 years old when I finally realized I needed to change, the first thing I had to do was grow up. Here's the truth that nobody ever wants to hear. When we're young, it's so easy to think that this kid stage is going to last forever. We think our same friends will always be there, the ride or dies, and we think and act like time isn't marching on against us. We act like growing up is something for older people. Well, guess what? Every single day, you are becoming the older people. This took me way too long to have it sink in my head, but if you're out of high school, you're old to those still in. If you're in your early 20s, you're now old to those starting college. Sure, you're still technically young, but in your 20s, you're supposed to be at a different stage than your late teens. And the same applies to later on in your 20s, your 30s, and so on. Your path doesn't have to be this perfect linear line, but you should be growing and moving into different stages along the way. The problem is that so many guys never climb out of that kid mentality, or they wait way too late. That was me. I held on to the ride for as long as I could, and at 22 years old roughly, I looked around and it was a hell of a lonely and different place. The days move slowly, you might notice, but the years stack up quickly. And one day, I woke up and all of my inaction had caught up with me. Friends had moved away, they got careers, they fell into relationships, and began filling their schedules with more and more adult things. So 4 years out of high school, many people that I had graduated with now had bachelor's degrees or had trades jobs, and they were moving on. As for me, I didn't have a stable relationship. I had a part-time job with no career potential or ambition. I had a pitiful 30 college credits with mostly C's and D's. I had the ability to learn the material, I just didn't care enough to try. I assumed I could give minimal effort and everything would just work itself out eventually, just like it always had. But here's a lesson that was tough for me to learn. The world doesn't care what your potential is. It cares about what you actually can do. It cares about results. For example, Porsche can design the most advanced car on the face of the earth with tons of potential, but if it doesn't have wheels, people are going to move on. I was more interested in maintaining the party lifestyle, and that can only go on for so long until you are the oldest and least successful person in the room. And that feeling sucks. For me, it felt like I was one of the few stragglers left behind. I was unhappy, and I realized that time was running out. So I had to decide right there and then that the first thing I had to do was finally grow up and act as if my future depended on it, because it sure as hell did. So the second thing I needed was a serious wake-up call. I looked around and I had this moment of clarity, and I finally realized that if I didn't make a change, I was destined to stay broke with no career and wallowing in my personal misery forever. I didn't want to work in a dead-end job and in the evening still be sitting on my favorite bar stool 10 or 15 years later. I know a lot of people like that. I realized that if I don't do something to get myself out of this mess I made, no one else will. There's no one on the way to rescue me. If I want a house and family one day, it's not just going to appear in my lap like I thought it would. This is what I'm telling myself at the time. Everything requires hard work. Now, do some people get lucky? Sure, man, but if you want to sit around and wait for your statistically unlikely lottery ticket in life, be my guest, but doing so while waiting and hoping that it'll all work out, you're making a horribly bad gamble with the one life that you have. I couldn't let that be my story, and I don't want that to be your story either. I recommend that you find the one major motivator that is your line in the sand, where you finally tell yourself, this way of living can't go on anymore. My line in the sand was realizing that I had already wasted a handful of years with nothing to show for it. And if that kept going, I would end up wasting my whole life. And that just didn't sit right with me. Up until that point, I had done whatever I wanted. I didn't pay attention in school or care to take anything seriously, so I didn't have any productivity or organizational skills. I didn't have any kind of mental framework in place to lean on. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but my motivation was simple. Don't end up as a local barfly or junkie like many guys I knew. So once I finally decided, hey, I'm going to make this change, I had to start from scratch. I began to consume books on self-development and the basics of personal finance because I had this need to try and catch up with everybody else. Now, this is really important. For a short time, I began to dabble with some of the get-rich-quick plans out there. I bought some ebooks and some courses of the latest and greatest schemes at the time. Unfortunately, that phase didn't last too long, and I realized that there are thousands of guys out there who have built empires trying to sell you this magical idea of overnight success. I was tempted by it because I figured I had so much lost time to make up for. And if that's you right now, please don't do it. There is no shortcut. The people who sell them prey on your emotions, and it's nothing new. You just need simplicity and to fall back on the basics. I began searching for free online courses just to teach myself things I wanted to get better at. You'd be surprised how many free offerings and courses there are online from universities that might not give you a degree or a credential, but it's still a place where you can learn. I just ended up making education a priority once again. I found a new love for it because it was material that actually interested me and something I could translate into practical use in daily life. Because now I wasn't learning for a grade anymore. Now it was learning to build a different life for myself. And like I touched on earlier, the world only cares about what we bring to the table. We trade our skills for money. So start trying to educate yourself on valuable skills that you can trade to earn a living. And ensure that it's something that has longevity and isn't a fad. Now for this fourth fundamental, this is where a lot of people tend to get hung up. Maybe you can relate, but I realized I was spending way too much time doing things to keep up with or impress people. People who didn't pay my bills or walk in my own shoes. So to finally correct this, I stopped going out to parties as much. I would stay in on a Friday or Saturday night by myself to have coffee or read a new book or do an online course because I wanted to. I even sold my sportier car for an older used one. And some people in my circle saw all of this as lame. Maybe your friends would think the same if you took similar steps. But you know what's actually lame? Holding yourself back from accomplishing more because you're worried what other people might think. Your friends aren't going to pull you out of your troubles because they have their own. Seeking approval from others or being the popular one isn't going to pull you out either. Yeah, people might help you out along your journey, but it's you who has to do the heavy lifting. They're not going to pay your bills and they're not going to deal with the struggles that you have going on. So don't allow other people's opinions to derail you from the journey that you want to go on. Now, here's something I wish I learned way earlier. It's not enough for you to just show up when you aren't where you want to be in life. If I've learned one thing over the years of doing the bare minimum, it's this. If you're trying to pull yourself up and out of a rut, showing up with nothing more than a pulse isn't going to cut it. The results obviously speak for themselves. You have to be hungry. I eventually made it a point to ask questions, volunteer for assignments. I would learn and try to build relationships with people. It's like that old saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. I just got to a point where I was tired of failing, and maybe you're at that point too. Think of any area in your life that you want to improve. It could be relationships, money, your career. Maybe you want to live somewhere else. It's not enough to just give those things some of your attention some of the time. And I still deal with this all the time in my own life, and I have to prioritize the things that are important to me, and often that means making some sacrifices, but I have to remember that showing up isn't enough if I want tangible and desirable results that I'm looking for. Now, this last fundamental is the hardest truth of all. This was and still is, in my opinion, the hardest pill for any man to swallow, and doing so really does take a healthy dose of humility. I was used to outsourcing the blame for my problems to everything else but myself. I eventually had to realize that everything that got me into my bad position was my fault and mine alone. It wasn't my parents' fault. It wasn't the fault of society or the town that I grew up in. I could have blamed the economy, coming from a broken household, a lack of opportunities in my area. I could have complained that no one really taught me how to do this, that, or the other thing to be successful. Because blaming everything else is the easy part. Anyone can do it. It was my fault that I didn't go to class. It was my fault that I didn't take my job seriously or pay my bills or act like an adult. It was my fault that I was wasting all of my money on the dumbest things. And it was my fault that I cared more about partying than my future. By blaming everyone and everything else for my issues, I gave them all the power over me, essentially saying, well, it's out of my hands. The world just hates me. And eventually taking responsibility really sucked. It was humbling and uncomfortable all at the same time. But here's what no one's going to tell you. The moment that I stopped blaming everyone else and took ownership, I got this power back. Because if I had the power to create this mess, that meant I had the same power to make it better. And that is exactly what you have too. Now, I'm sure there are issues that are out of your control, no doubt about it. But I guarantee that if you're willing to take a hard look at your habits, your self-talk, how you fill your schedule, how you apply yourself, you're going to find areas where you know you could be better. There are areas that if you improve by 10%, you would see better results. And if you'd like to go more in depth on breaking out of the victim mindset, I'll link to a video that I did on it down below. I'm sharing all of this because I wasted years that I can't get back. I was around 22 or 23 before I began to finally figure this out, but that was just the very start of a really long journey to recovery. And I'm not gonna lie, I wish I started way sooner. But that means you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. These fundamentals that I learned aren't sexy, and they're not ones that you're going to get from gurus, but they're the basics that really help me out. We start with the simplest solutions before laying on that complexity. In whatever hole that you're in right now, you need to know that it's not permanent unless you choose to stay there. 10 years from now, you'll either be glad that you started today, or you'll wish that you had. Which person do you want to be? Drop a comment down below and let me know what fundamentals have helped you during your journey. If this resonated with you, you might also like this video over here, which I'll link to once it's live. I'll see you in the next one.